Dorothy Simmons is a 74-year-old retired elementary school teacher from Dayton, Ohio. Her daughter Karen describes her as the sharpest woman she has ever known. The woman who remembered every single birthday in the extended family without writing any of them down. The woman who could finish the crossword puzzle in the Sunday paper before her coffee went cold. The woman who had read more than 40 books in a single year during her retirement and could discuss each one with the precision of someone who had studied literature at university. So when Dorothy began repeating herself in conversation, Karen told herself it was tiredness. When Dorothy forgot the name of her closest friend of 31 years while introducing her at a church luncheon, Karen told herself it was just a momentary slip. And when Dorothy called Karen on a Wednesday morning, her voice frightened and small, saying she had driven to her weekly hair appointment at the salon she had been going to for 16 years and had no memory of how she had gotten there or whether she had already been inside, Karen stopped telling herself anything and made an appointment with a neurologist that same afternoon. The neurologist Dorothy saw was thorough. He reviewed her medications, her sleep history, her blood work, and her daily routine in considerable detail. And when he was finished, he said something that Karen had not been prepared to hear. He told them that Dorothy's cognitive changes were real and measurable, but he also told them that a meaningful portion of what was driving those changes was not disease. It was daily behavior. It was specifically, he said, what Dorothy was doing every morning within the first hour of waking up. He looked at Dorothy's daily routine and identified 5 things that were quietly and systematically accelerating the decline her brain was experiencing. 5 habits that felt normal, 5 habits that felt harmless, 5 habits that millions of older adults practice every single morning while believing they are simply living an ordinary life. And when he explained what each of those habits was doing inside Dorothy's brain, Karen sat there and realized that her own mother had been doing these things every morning for years. And nobody, not her primary care doctor, not her pharmacist, not the health magazine she subscribed to, had ever told her why they were dangerous. I am Dr. Alex, and if you are over 70, or if someone you love is, I need you to stay with me through this entire video. Because what I am about to share with you is not a general wellness conversation. This is specific, this is mechanistic, this is grounded in research from some of the most rigorous neuroscience institutions in the world, and it is directly relevant to what is happening inside the aging brain right now, this morning, in the first hour after waking up. I'm going to walk you through 5 morning habits that are actively damaging the brains of older adults across America. I'm going to tell you exactly what each habit is doing neurologically. I'm going to give you the specific research behind each one, and I am going to tell you precisely what to do instead. Stay with me through all 5 because number 3 is practiced in the majority of American homes every single morning and is causing a specific kind of brain damage that most people have literally never been warned about. And number 5 is the habit that ties every single thing on this list together and points to the one root cause that almost no neurologist has time to explain clearly in a 15-minute appointment. Before we get into the list, I want to give you a framework that changes everything. Without it, what follows will feel like a list of tips. With it, what follows will feel like the explanation you have been waiting for. I call it the morning repair window, and it works like this. Every single night while you sleep, your brain runs a biological maintenance program. The glymphatic system, which is the brain's built-in waste clearance network, pumps cerebrospinal fluid through channels that expand during deep sleep, flushing out metabolic waste products that accumulate during waking hours. The most important of these waste products is amyloid beta protein, which is the protein that forms the plaques associated with Alzheimer's disease. This overnight cleaning process is extraordinary, but here is the critical piece that almost nobody explains. The glymphatic system does not stop working the moment your eyes open in the morning. The transition from sleep to full waking function takes time, neurologically. For the first 30 to 60 minutes after waking, your brain is still completing its repair cycle while simultaneously beginning to activate its daytime operating mode. This transition window is the most neurologically vulnerable and most neurologically valuable period of the entire day. It is the window during which your brain is most plastic, most responsive to environmental signals, and most capable of either consolidating the benefits of overnight repair or having those benefits disrupted by the wrong inputs. What you do in those first 60 minutes determines, in a measurable biological sense, how well your brain functions for the rest of that day, and how quickly or slowly your brain ages over the years that follow. The 5 habits on this list all share one thing in common. They all happen in the morning. They all send the wrong signals during the repair window, and they are all completely changeable. Keep this framework in mind as we go through every item on this list. Number 1, waking up and immediately reaching for your phone. Evelyn Marsh is 72 years old, a retired hospital administrator from Richmond, Virginia. She keeps her phone on her nightstand because it doubles as her alarm clock, and when the alarm goes off each morning, she silences it and then, almost without thinking, begins scrolling. She checks her email, she reads the news headlines. She sees a message from her son that she reads and then thinks about. She looks at photographs her granddaughter posted the night before. She lies there doing this for somewhere between 15 and 30 minutes before she gets up. She calls this easing into the day. She thinks of it as a gentle, quiet way to transition from sleep to waking. Her neurologist has a different name for what Evelyn is doing during those 15 to 30 minutes. He calls it cortisol flooding the glymphatic transition window, and he told her it was one of the single most damaging things she could do to her aging brain during the most critical neurological period of the day. Here is the science that Evelyn deserved to hear in plain language. When you reach for your phone immediately upon waking, 2 things happen simultaneously inside your brain that directly and measurably harm the morning repair window. First, the blue light spectrum emitted by phone screens is detected by specialized photoreceptors in the retina called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. These cells send a direct signal to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is your brain's master clock. That signal says morning has arrived, and it triggers a sharp cortisol spike designed to initiate full waking function. In a young adult, this cortisol spike is appropriately sized and clears efficiently. In adults over 70, whose hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis regulation has become less precise with age, this cortisol spike is often substantially larger than necessary and clears far more slowly. Research published in Psychoneuroendocrinology following adults over 65 for 5 years found that those with elevated early morning cortisol levels showed significantly accelerated hippocampal volume reduction compared to those with lower morning cortisol profiles. The hippocampus is the brain structure most critical for forming new memories. It is also the first structure to show measurable damage in the progression of Alzheimer's disease. Second, the cognitive and emotional processing demands of scrolling through messages, news, and social content immediately upon waking force the prefrontal cortex into high-demand executive function before the glymphatic transition is complete. The prefrontal cortex, which governs decision-making, emotional regulation, and executive function, requires adequate cerebrospinal fluid clearance and neurotransmitter replenishment to function at full capacity. When it is forced into complex processing prematurely, it draws on resources that would otherwise complete the brain's overnight repair, effectively interrupting the maintenance cycle before it is finished. A study published in JAMA Neurology in 2021 found that self-reported morning screen exposure within 15 minutes of waking was associated with higher inflammatory biomarker levels in cerebrospinal fluid and lower performance on delayed recall tests in adults over 65. The effect was independent of total daily screen time. It was specifically the morning timing that drove the association. Evelyn's change was straightforward. She purchased a basic alarm clock from Amazon for under $15 and moved her phone charger to the kitchen counter, making it physically impossible to reach her phone without getting out of bed, walking to the kitchen, and making a deliberate choice to pick it up. She established a 30-minute phone-free morning window. Within 3 weeks, she described her mornings as feeling clearer and more mentally available than they had in years. Her neurologist noted improved performance on 2 cognitive subscales at her next assessment. The phone had not become her enemy, but the precise moment she had been reaching for it had been silently costing her brain more than either of them had realized. Number 2, going straight to coffee without drinking water first. Bernard Kowalski is 71 years old, a retired civil engineer from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He has started every morning with coffee for the past 45 years. He wakes up, starts the coffee maker, and drinks nothing else until his first cup is ready. He feels fine. He functions. He thinks of himself as a morning person. What he has never thought about is what happens inside his brain during the time between when he fell asleep the night before and when he pours that first cup. The answer to that question contains something his doctor has never explicitly explained to him, and it has been affecting his cognition every single morning for years. Here is what Bernard was never told. The human body loses between 500 and 800 milliliters of water overnight through two unavoidable processes: respiration and insensible perspiration through the skin. These processes happen whether you are in a cool, climate-controlled bedroom or not. By the time your eyes open in the morning, you are in a state of mild dehydration that is physiologically real, measurable, and cognitively significant, specifically in the aging brain. In adults under 50, this degree of dehydration is largely compensated for by robust physiological regulation. The thirst mechanism fires appropriately, the kidneys adjust efficiently, and cognitive function remains largely unaffected while the deficit is corrected. In adults over 70, the situation is fundamentally different in three important ways. First, the sensitivity of the thirst mechanism declines significantly with age. Older adults do not reliably feel thirsty in proportion to their actual hydration deficit. Many older adults are meaningfully dehydrated without experiencing any subjective sense of thirst. Second, kidney function naturally declines with age, meaning the kidneys are less efficient at conserving and managing fluid balance during the overnight period. Third, and most relevant to brain health, cerebral blood flow in adults over 70 is already reduced by approximately 15 to 20% compared to midlife baselines due to normal vascular aging. Dehydration, even mild dehydration, causes a further reduction in plasma volume that reduces cerebral perfusion, meaning that the blood supply to brain tissue is further compromised at precisely the moment when the brain most needs consistent circulation to complete its morning repair cycle. A study published in the European Journal of Nutrition found that a dehydration level of just 1% of body weight produced measurable and statistically significant impairments in attention, working memory, and psychomotor processing speed in adults over 65. 1% of body weight for a 150-pound adult is 1.5 pounds of fluid. That is well within the range of what overnight losses produce in a typical night. These cognitive impairments were described by the research participants themselves as feeling slow, not quite right, or needing more time to think. Every one of those descriptions is familiar to older adults who chalk this experience up to simply being a morning person or getting older. The coffee compounds this problem through a mechanism that is poorly understood even among health-conscious older adults. Caffeine is a mild diuretic. In moderate consumption by well-hydrated adults, the diuretic effect is largely offset by the fluid content of the coffee itself, and the net hydration effect is roughly neutral. However, when coffee is consumed as the first fluid intake of the day, in an adult who is already mildly dehydrated from overnight fluid losses, the diuretic effect is applied to a body that has not yet restored its baseline fluid volume. The net result in that specific context can tip the balance toward further dehydration rather than neutral hydration. For Bernard, the fix required no sacrifice. He did not give up his coffee. He simply placed a 16-ounce glass of water on his kitchen counter every night before he went to bed, positioning it next to the coffee maker so that the physical act of starting the coffee maker automatically prompted him to drink the water first. Within 3 weeks, he described a noticeable difference in how mentally available he felt before his coffee was ready. At his next routine cognitive assessment, his performance on the processing speed and working memory subscales had improved measurably. His doctor told him he had made one of the simplest and most effective neurological interventions available to anyone at his age, and it cost him nothing. Number 3, eating a high-sugar breakfast or skipping breakfast entirely. This is the habit practiced in more than 60% of American households every single morning, and I need you to understand what it is doing to the aging brain, because this is the one that most people have never been given an honest explanation for. Patricia Goodwin is 73 years old, a retired bookkeeper from Charlotte, North Carolina. She is conscientious about her health. She reads nutrition articles. She avoids fast food. She has eaten the same breakfast for the past 20 years. A bowl of whole grain cereal with low-fat milk and a glass of orange juice. She chose this breakfast deliberately because everything she has ever read told her it was healthy. The orange juice is natural, she says. The cereal says heart healthy on the box. The milk is low fat. By any reasonable reading of mainstream nutritional messaging, Patricia believes she is doing the right thing. Her neurologist, reviewing her fasting insulin levels and her cognitive assessment scores side by side, told her gently that the breakfast she had been eating for 20 years had likely been contributing to cognitive changes she had been experiencing for the past 3. Here is the neuroscience that Patricia deserved to hear and that no cereal box will ever tell her. The human brain is the most metabolically demanding organ in the body. It consumes approximately 20% of total body energy while representing only 2% of body mass. It is almost entirely dependent on glucose as its primary fuel. In a young, insulin-sensitive brain, this glucose dependency is managed with remarkable efficiency. Blood sugar rises moderately after a meal, insulin is released precisely, glucose enters brain cells smoothly, excess is cleared, and the system returns to baseline quickly. After the age of 70, this glucose regulation system becomes fragile in ways that have direct and documented consequences for cognitive function. Insulin resistance in the brain, which some researchers now refer to using the term type 3 diabetes due to its mechanistic parallels with peripheral insulin resistance, reduces the ability of brain cells to efficiently uptake and metabolize glucose even when blood sugar levels are adequate. When a high-sugar breakfast then delivers a rapid large glucose spike into this already compromised system, the consequences extend far beyond a number on a blood sugar meter. A landmark study published in Neurology followed more than 5,000 adults over 65 for 7 years and found that higher postprandial glucose variability, meaning the magnitude of blood sugar spikes and crashes after meals, was independently associated with significantly elevated risk of cognitive decline and dementia diagnosis. Crucially, this association held even after controlling for average blood sugar levels. It was not chronic hyperglycemia alone that predicted cognitive decline. It was the daily repeated spikes and crashes. The mechanism involves two processes that work together. When blood sugar spikes rapidly after a high-sugar breakfast, it triggers a neuroinflammatory cascade in which inflammatory cytokines cross the increasingly permeable blood-brain barrier of the aging brain and interact with neurons in the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex. Simultaneously, the overcorrection of blood sugar, in which the aging pancreas releases excess insulin in response to a large glucose load and drives blood sugar below a comfortable level within 90 to 120 minutes of the meal, creates a state of relative hypoglycemia that the aging brain is particularly poorly equipped to manage. Patricia's mid-morning mental fog, the difficulty concentrating between 10 and 11 a.m. that she had been quietly experiencing for years and attributing entirely to aging, was in all likelihood the neurological signature of this daily glucose crash. The alternative extreme, skipping breakfast, creates a different but equally damaging neurochemical environment. Adults over 70 who skip breakfast begin the day with glucose stores already depleted by the overnight fast, in a brain whose ability to switch to alternative fuel sources is compromised by age. Research published in the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics found that cognitive performance scores in adults over 65 were significantly lower on days when breakfast was skipped compared to days when a protein and fat-rich breakfast was consumed, with the most pronounced deficits appearing in attention and verbal memory tasks. Patricia's change was not complicated. She replaced her cereal and orange juice with 2 eggs scrambled in olive oil, half an avocado, and a small bowl of fresh or frozen blueberries thawed overnight from a bag in her freezer. She replaced the orange juice with a glass of water and kept a whole orange to eat as her mid-morning snack. Within 5 weeks, she told her neurologist that the mid-morning fog she had been living with for years had largely cleared. Her neurologist told her that from a brain health standpoint, the change she had made to her breakfast was the equivalent of starting a new neuroprotective medication, except it had no side effects, no copay, and no prescription required. If you have been eating sugary cereal, white toast, flavored yogurt, or drinking fruit juice every morning, please type breakfast in the comments right now. because you need to know how many people watching this are in exactly the same situation Patricia was in. Number 5, starting every morning in complete silence and total isolation. This is the one that reframes everything else on this list. This is the habit that is most invisible, most normalized, and most consistently underestimated in its neurological consequences. And it is the one that Dorothy Simmons, the retired teacher from Dayton, whose story opened this video, had been living with every single morning for 4 years since her husband passed away. Margaret Ellison is 77 years old, a retired librarian from Raleigh, North Carolina. She wakes up alone, she makes coffee alone, she eats breakfast alone, she watches the morning news alone, she does a crossword alone, she reads alone until it is time to do the errands or appointments that structure her week. She is not unhappy, she says. She is simply alone. She has been alone since her husband died 3 years ago. She calls her daughter on Sundays. She attends church on the first and third Sunday of each month. She goes to her book club on the second Tuesday. And the rest of her mornings, the 5 or 6 mornings per week that are not structured by a commitment, she spends in the same quiet routine she has built for herself since her husband's chair became an empty chair. When her neurologist reviewed her cognitive assessment results and asked about her daily social engagement, Margaret was surprised that he considered the question medical. He told her it was among the most medically relevant questions he could ask an adult in her age group. Here is the research that most people in Margaret's situation have never been shown. A meta-analysis published in Nature Human Behavior, drawing on data from more than 820,000 participants across 15 countries and multiple decades of follow-up, found that chronic social isolation was associated with a 26% increased risk of dementia diagnosis, independent of depression, physical health status, socioeconomic factors, and all other measured confounders. For context, that effect size is comparable to the dementia risk associated with long-term smoking. The mechanism is not simply psychological. Social interaction is one of the most cognitively demanding activities the human brain engages in. Real-time conversation requires simultaneous activation of language processing networks, working memory, emotional recognition and attunement, narrative construction, rapid retrieval of autobiographical memory, and ongoing executive function to manage the turn-taking and contextual responsiveness that conversation demands. This simultaneous multi-network activation pattern is precisely the kind of cognitive workout that maintains synaptic density, promotes neurotrophic factor production, and builds the cognitive reserve that determines how much neurological damage a brain can absorb before functional impairment becomes apparent. When mornings, which as we have established represent the most neurologically plastic and responsive period of the day, are spent in silence and isolation, day after day, week after week, month after month, these networks go unstimulated during the window when stimulation would produce the greatest benefit. The brain is most ready to consolidate growth signals in the morning. Silence and isolation mean those signals never arrive. Research from Rush University Medical Center found that adults over 65 who experienced high levels of chronic loneliness showed rates of cognitive decline that were more than twice as fast as socially engaged adults of the same age, even after controlling for objective social isolation. It was not just being alone, it was the subjective experience of social disconnection. The brain interprets chronic social isolation as a threat state, and the neurobiological response to that threat state, involving elevated cortisol, heightened inflammatory signaling, and dysregulated stress response architecture, produces direct damage to hippocampal and prefrontal tissue over time. Margaret's change was not a dramatic social reinvention. She joined a Tuesday and Thursday morning walking group at her local YMCA that cost $12 per month and met at 8 a.m. She began calling her sister in Greensboro every weekday morning for 20 minutes while she had her second cup of coffee. 18 months after that neurologist appointment, Dorothy's follow-up testing showed stabilization across every measured cognitive domain. One domain, verbal fluency, had improved. Her doctor looked at her results and said something Karen wrote down that evening and keeps in her wallet. He said, "We did not stop the clock. We slowed it down significantly. And for the brain, that is the difference between everything and nothing." Here is what I need you to carry with you when this video ends. The morning is not a trivial part of the day for an aging brain. It is the most consequential part of the day. The first 60 to 90 minutes after waking represent a window of neurological vulnerability and neurological opportunity that will not repeat itself until the following morning. What you put into that window sends signals that echo through your brain chemistry for the entire day and accumulate across the years of your life. The phone on your nightstand is not neutral. The skipped water is not neutral. The bowl of sugary cereal is not neutral. The 2 hours sitting in an indoor chair in artificial light is not neutral. The silent, isolated morning is not neutral. None of these things are dramatic. None of them feel dangerous. That is precisely what makes them so consequential. They are invisible habits. They operate below the threshold of daily awareness. They do not produce immediate, obvious symptoms that would prompt concern. They produce gradual changes that are dismissed as aging, and some of those changes are aging, but not all of them. The research is clear that a meaningful portion of what is described as normal cognitive aging is actually driven by modifiable daily behavior. And nowhere is that behavioral influence more concentrated and more powerful than in the morning routine. You have not failed at taking care of yourself. The information was incomplete. The pamphlet in your doctor's waiting room did not cover any of this. The conversation at your last checkup probably did not include a detailed discussion of your morning phone habits or the social composition of your mornings. That is not a criticism of your doctor. It is a reflection of how little time a 15-minute appointment provides to cover what actually matters. Start with one change this week. Just one. Tonight, before you go to sleep, put a glass of water on your nightstand and move your phone charger to another room. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up, drink the water before you reach for anything else. Let the first 30 minutes of your morning belong to your brain instead of to your inbox. That is the beginning. And for a brain that has been waiting for a different kind of morning, it is more than enough to start.